Welcome. This is the podcast by Rip the Farm Up called Maintaining Ground, and I am your host, Andy the Elf.
In this podcast experiment, I'll be talking with old friends, new friends, and a whole variety of people who are very inspiring, intriguing, and have their own opinion about the world to share and incredible stories. So I hope you enjoy this experiment. Hey everybody, welcome. Yeah, thank you. Today we have Morag Gamble from Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, Morag.
Hi Andy, it's really great to be here.
All right, everybody calm down. Okay, so Morag actually was my first permaculture teacher, and it's really brilliant to connect with her today and explore what we're going to talk about together. So I know when I first went to permaculture class, I actually found it when I was skateboarding around in Brisbane, and I came across a bulletin board, and on the bulletin board there was a little flyer on it. Yep, that's how we used to find out how to do things. So
Hey Andy, that is so funny because I always thought, I used to go around and put a little notices up all around those boards. I thought, no one is ever going to see this.
yeah.
And you did. Oh, that is so awesome.
Yeah, so I remember at our first class, it was me and my girlfriend at the time, and we were exploring Australia, and it was something I wanted to do, so I brought us there, and everybody else that was there, I think, happened to be chiropractors.
That's right. And after doing that course, they moved from Victoria up to this area, and we've stayed in touch with them ever since. They're actually our chiropractors now, having done that course.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So your spine's been kept proper then. That's good.
Yeah, all the gardening is all, like it getting smoothed out. That's nice.
Yeah. So at that time, the class was at a place called Crystal Waters, which I've come to find over the years is referenced quite a lot. And it's fascinating to have had that be one of the starting seeds of this concept in my life.
Wake the farm up.
Just to give you some feedback too, before this class, I was definitely an angry, stop this, no more that. Don't cut down those forests, don't do this. And I was just like running out of breath, and I felt like I learned how to breathe again after a permaculture class.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, Andy, because as a teenager, that was me as well. and it was it was actually through permaculture that I found that groundedness is a way, what I call now, to be a practivist.
Practivist.
Positive, practical activist. And it's really deeply connected with place, with community, with people, with self. It's like it's nourishing the soil, it's nourishing yourself, it's nourishing the planet. It's creating the kind of environment that we want to see in the world.
Yes.
And through that, it's also simultaneously saying, actually that kind of way of being is not working, but this is, and offering an invitation into something different, something more positive, something that invites others to come and play with you. And I think it's really refreshing. And so it's really interesting that you say that. Thanks for sharing that.
Practivist.
Very well said. I'm in awe again. That's amazing. So you've been teaching permaculture ever since. I know along my way I came across a flyer once again somewhere about you coming to the farm in Tennessee.
Oh, the farm. Oh, that was such an amazing time at the farm. You mentioned at the start that I'm from Melbourne, but I have actually been living at Crystal Waters for a quarter of a century now.
Wow.
I grew up in Melbourne, but this has sort of been my home. And ecovillages has been a really huge part of this permaculture journey, because it's thinking about, well, how are we to live? You know, it's not, and that's not just about how you live in your own life in your own block. It's how you connect beyond your boundaries, beyond your household, beyond your fences, and really think about community permaculture. And so I'd been working with the Global Ecovillage Network and connecting with ecovillages around the world. And one of the founders of that ecovillage, Albert Bates, invited Evan and I to come and teach permaculture there. And we, ever since I met you, we've been teaching around the world, maybe 20 different countries. I remember the farm distinctly because it was such a haven of people who were so curious about exploring different ways forward. So we were showering in the midst of a garden in sun-winged solar hot water system, something that you could make yourself wherever you are. And I think this is a really interesting thing, because they were developing stuff that was not about, luxury eco-living for those who could afford it. This was about real appropriate technology, simple living that was about having a lighter footprint on the planet at the same time as, again, creating greater levels of well-being and in that security too.
Yeah.
I think people often think security is, having a big fence and, enough money in the bank, whereas security is
attack drones. And
security is your entanglement and your deep connections with place and food systems and community.
Yeah. I often think about how a lot of people are screaming for green energy, like renewable energy sources, and I know they're slapping up panels all over the United States right now, and it sounds like a good thing on some regard, but it's always interesting to think, like, are these people screaming for this, like, trying to use less of it too?
Well, I think that's the absolute first thing that we can be doing in terms of any of our activism is thinking, well, how can we actually live with less energy consumption, and that's through really good design and relocalization, and it's part of what I've been trying to demonstrate here at Crystal Waters. So the house I designed and built, and the gardens and the community spaces, how can I live well, but yet using, at that time when I was designing, I was saying 80% less energy and resources, because my rationale for that was my understanding of the ecological footprint, and the research back then was saying, and it still is now, I mean, it's unfortunate we haven't really made any progress on this, but that if everyone in the world lived like a typical Australian, we would need at least 4 Earths. So I was thinking, okay, well, what is one planet living look like? If we were to live as though we were living within the constraints of the planetary boundaries in a way that was really good living, and also really regenerative so it was restoring natural environments, creating regenerative systems. What's that one planet living look like? And so that's kind of what I've tried to demonstrate in a way that is appealing and attractive to people who come. So I open up, like just next week, I've got a group of Year 12 design students coming in.
Cool.
And I want them to come here and go, yeah, I could live like this. As a designer, this is the sort of thing that I want to design. And that it makes sense, it's beautiful, it's regenerative, and all of those things together. So that's kind of been my goal, is to, as well as teaching, also living it and demonstrating it. So it has this, I don't know, like it's like an invitation to come and play as well. I mean, that's how I like to describe it.
I like that. I think I'm always very good at the playing aspect. So people have called me Elf since before you even knew me. And I often think about how, just like the little things I even do. Like earlier today, I looked at Facebook for maybe like 15 minutes and look at the first couple of posts that people put, and there was a picture of a basket of fruit and somebody saying, I can't wait to get here with my farm, my homestead. And there's a whole list of comments there of people being like, yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, I just planted this. And it's like really amazing to see this excitement. And then to just amp it up even more, I just put a picture of my day's basket of fruit and said, there. Just trying to encourage them, you know, like, you will get there. Like, yeah, see, it's possible around here. And I even was inspired to create a little short video where I'm like walking past the honeyberry bush down to the Carolina pine strawberries and just come out with a whole handful of them. And, you know, I just make it playful and fun with some fun music.
Yeah, and you know, it is totally possible. And what I think permaculture is really great for is it's applying a lens to how you see the world and how you interact with the world. So you can walk through that way that you just talked about,
right,
and not see that. Could be thinking about, you know, how many steps you're doing and it's all about you.
Or what kind of shoes does that guy have on?
Yeah. Or you could be walking through in a really deeply interconnected way and observing and noticing what's happening around and then you remember, that taste and that season. So, you know, you start to become more Indigenous in that place in a way. You're there long enough and you start to see the seasons changing and what kind of foods are coming through. Like, I've been here, like I said, for 25 years now, and I hang out for the time that it's wild raspberry season along the rivers, or it's the bunya nut season when, you know, the bunya nuts are falling, these 10-kilogram pine cones, which were incredibly important for Indigenous communities, you know, well before white people arrived on this land. And just to start to learn about and to be part of what's going on and seeing the food that's around you all the time. I just did a talk down in Brisbane. Actually, you mentioned Brisbane earlier. I dropped down to Brisbane on the weekend to do a workshop there, and we're talking about banana, for example. And I said, come on, like, let's all of us think about what are the at least 10 things that we could be doing with banana. You know, because often when we think banana, we just think the yellow bit that's inside the skin. Like, what other parts are edible? What other parts can we integrate banana, say, in the ecosystem that our garden is? And after the session, this woman came up to me. She was from the Philippines, and she was so excited. She said, and we do this, and we do this, and we do this. She said every single part of every single plant we use for this or that. And, you know, it's the same with every single vegetable in the garden. You know, when you say broccoli, most people will just think of the broccoli immature flower, whereas actually every single part of a broccoli plant is edible, from the leaves to the flowers to the, you know, even one they've gone past, you know, being what you accept as being edible. Everything is edible, the seeds even. And so we have this figure in Australia that says, and it's probably similar in the States, that 30 to 40% of the food that's grown is wasted. And isn't that dreadful? And it's such a problem. Yes, it's a huge problem, because the embodied energy of all of that and the problems that's creating, and also think about the degradation of the landscape to produce that food that's waste. I would actually hazard a guess to say that we waste possibly up to maybe 80% of the food that we grow, simply because we don't recognize that it's food.
Right.
We don't need all that space to grow all that stuff. We can condense the space in which we grow food if we start to think about food differently and relocalize our food. You know, there's probably only 3 plants which feeds most of the world now with, you know, 60% of their calories.
Right.
12 plants which most people use on an everyday basis. You know, there are 30,000 at least different varieties of edible plants that are all localized, and then it's not just the different types, it's, like I said, all the different parts of the plant. You know, you could be growing a pea, for example. You can eat pea shoots, you can eat the pea flowers, you eat the young pea pods, you can eat the peas when they're green, you can eat the peas when they're dried, you can sprout the peas, you know, for the whole life cycle of that plant. But you need to have a greater level of relationship with your food and your food system, and even in a small space. You can have a backyard, a courtyard, a street garden, a community garden, an allotment, a school garden, and wherever it may be, there are ways to actually grow huge amounts of food and have something to eat every day.
Right. amount of food that is growing around people and they just don't even know it too. There's just a lack of connection often there that allows them to know how much food is there. And a lot of people work really hard to have their gardens produce these certain things, even though their land might actually be trying to offer to grow some other kinds of things than what you're trying to grow. An example for where I'm at, there's high levels of alkaline soils, so it's really hard to grow blueberries, but Americans really want their blueberries. But I grow a honeyberry, which tastes just like them and look a little different. They're more elongated, but it's a honeysuckle that does fine on the alkaline soil. It's a Linicera caerulea, and they taste great. So it's like, why can't we be growing and adapting ourselves to our environments to eat what is more easily offering itself, as opposed to apple trees here are like, I don't have any apple trees at my place. It's just, it doesn't make sense here. There's cedar trees that give them apple cedar rust. There's just so many vectors for disease here now that it's time to evolve and adapt our diet and cuisine.
Absolutely. And you know what that does then too is turn it from being a fight, that this whole thing of farming is a fight against nature, or fight against the bugs, and just constantly having to add this or spray that, and I often hear people talking in different sessions I do, I've tried this and it doesn't work and it's so hard. And whereas when you flip that narrative of the way of gardening to something that's more a peaceful, natural way of gardening, and noticing, like saying, what just belongs, what fits, what's here, what grows because it's wanting to be there and it's tending towards complexity. And I watch this in my garden too, in terms of all the little annuals that just love to sell seeds. So at the moment, in my garden, I've got pumpkins and sweet potatoes. I've not planted either of those for over a decade, but they're there all the time.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Mustard spinaches, they're always, so I have greens and the seeds of that come up. I make my own mustards from that and curry powders. I don't plant turmeric, but I've always got turmeric in my garden now. What else? Lagos spinach, Suriname spinach, bananas. All these things are just there because, I either got them started and then they've just kind of naturalized in this ecosystem that's my garden, or there's also this integration of native plants, and of course all the amazing weeds which you find everywhere. And unfortunately, the concept of weed makes it have a really bad name, but chickweed or dandelion or nettles or whatever it is that you find in your local area, they are such important local foods and local medicines that it really does. It's this lens, a lens of seeing what's possible and what's abundant, rather than coming in with a notion of, well, I don't know if you read, the old Peter Rabbit thing, but the Mr. McGregor's garden we have, when we think about creating a vegetable garden, there's all this narrative in our minds that we have.
Fight. Time for war.
From, all the neat edges and neat rows, and everything's all in boxes with these rectilineal pathways. And I really encourage people to also flip that. Like, let's make more garden space with bigger beds, with little pathways in it. You don't need to have a wheelbarrow going to every single section. You can have one wheelbarrow section going along the main bit and then little pathways going in, because the bigger the bed, the more life you're going to have in the soil, because we now know about this mycelial network which connects all of the plants in healthy soil. If you have them all boxed up, it's basically just like having a whole lot of potted big pots out in your garden. Yeah. Whereas if you have it's basically just like a whole lot of big containers out there. Yeah. Whereas if you have a big bed that's all connected and you're feeding the soil and nourishing the soil life is going to be rich and alive and be nourishing and connecting all of those different plants, and they will thrive and find their space. And it's also absorbing so much more moisture, and it's this aliveness of the soil that we need to focus on if we're going to actually create gardens that we're not going to have a battle with or constantly getting bug eaten because the soil is just lacking in its health. And so I think the whole food system really needs to sort of shift from thinking about what's visible to what's going on in the unseen world and tend to that.
Yeah. And I think that whole adapting too. So earlier you mentioned the banyan nut. Can you tell us about some other native crops or foraging? I want to get back to that too. I want to ask you about foraging in that regard. And just there's a lot of different names for that. So I'd love to hear what some of your favorite names are for things such as forest gardening and ecoculture or forage farming. Wild food gardening with invasives. There's so many names for like a similar thing.
Well, one that I use a lot these days is forage garden for my vegetable garden area. And because it is, you never quite know what's going to be in different places because there's things that keep emerging because the conditions keep changing and it's right. So the forage garden is one that I use a lot, as well as the food forest. But then just, wild harvesting, just simply, foraging. And I was talking to an Aboriginal elder here a little while ago, and I was asking them about, so what's the term that you use for it? Like we call them bush foods is the kind of the name that gets bandied around a lot. He just said food.
That's it.
And anyway, so I went and walk about one day with him, and we were taste testing all these different things. So there's, the berries that come off the native ginger, which are just amazing. Or you can sort of pluck out one of the stalks and gnaw on the end of a native ginger stalk, and it tastes beautifully gingery, and it's really refreshing if you're out for a walk. Or you can also, bandicoot down, dig up some of the roots and use that as an alternative for ginger, mild ginger in your cooking, or wrap up food in the leaves of it. There's also little midgem berries that are around in the undergrowth in the sort of the drier spots, and they're these little brown and white spotted berries that are almost like eucalyptus drops. They're amazing. Or there's the incredible lemon myrtle, which belongs here on the rainforest margins, and the scent of that is just incredible. I use it for everything that I would use maybe a standard lemon for in terms of flavouring, from yogurts to baking to soups and all different sorts of things, stir fries. And then, the banyan nut is one of the amazing ones because it has, it's huge. It's like, if you think about a pine cone, but yet you could only fit a couple of the kernels in the palm of your hand. They're huge. So much food. You can chuck them in a fire and cook them up, roast them, barbecue them, bake them. And then there's some other things like lily pillies, which are little.
Wow, they sound
lily
so
pillies.
cute.
Oh, they are. Well, it's a beautiful glossy tree. Again, it's sort of more of a rainforesty margin type plant, but we've naturalised them across Australia now because they're so pretty and beautiful flowers that attract so many pollinators into the garden. And being sort of more shrubby type, they're great spots for little birds to hide. So I like to intersperse them in the garden because the little birds are insectivorous birds, so they come in and they're helping me with pest management around the garden. But the berries on them, they're all different sorts, from orange ones to purple ones to red ones to pink ones, and each different one have their different flavours. So the some of them are almost, I don't know, like cherry flavoured. Some are more appley flavoured, and then there's
It sounds like jelly beans, like
oh, they are. They're so amazing. They're about that size as well.
I bet if you got a rotten one, it would taste like some of the joke jelly beans they have. I don't know if you've ever come across joke jelly beans.
My kids have, but I've kind of avoid that, kind of the horror of the possibility of that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Lily Pillies would totally fill that, like, for everybody.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. And then there's the flowers, the native flowers like grevillea. Grevillea is this beautiful plant, and again, they've been taken by the horticultural industry and spread out across Australia. But I grew up in a household where, my mum was really conscious about health, and we had no sugar, no salt, no coffee, no tea. Everything was sort of natural,
No jelly
and vegetarian.
beans.
No jelly beans, except on party times. There you go. We were allowed to have, But so my brother and I, we were used to try and in the garden. Mum planted a native garden because she was really keen about attracting birds and wildlife to the garden. And around the edges were these beautiful little flowers. And if you pluck them off carefully, they were filled. My mouth's watering thinking about this. You pluck them off carefully and you suck the nectar out of them. So my brother and I would just stand there sucking the nectar out of these plants. And so I've always incorporated grevilleas into my garden too. And each of the different ones, again, the different colours have different flavours. Like the bronzy, orangey ones, almost like caramel. So you could just be sitting there, like sucking out this caramel syrup out of a flower directly. Like there's nothing better than that. It's so amazing.
That sounds so good. I know some of my listeners might be some people that I know who tease me about my description of wild plant foods that they haven't tried. For example, there's the hackberry, which is probably the closest thing to a caramely kind of flavor that you find wild naturally growing here. And it's a Celtis occidentalis. And those berries, they taste like milk duds to me. And I tell them that, but they don't agree, but I admit that I haven't had a milk dud in probably 30 years, so it's a poor description perhaps for them. Yeah. But I know that I probably describe things very similar to you. You're so excited about it, and you have so much passion about it, and it's the fun part that just brings it all together. It makes it fun every day, just different tastes and flavors. Exploring nature in that way is so fun. And we didn't even mention, like, how permaculture incorporates all those other things too, like things we can build with and create fibers with, and so many other uses, fuels for burning things or whatnot, for cooking. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Morag, was watching permaculture change and grow since the internet came about.
Well, I actually think that from a bigger picture, it's been super positive because it's become more of a household name. It's become more visible. It's if you think about that the sort of that mycelial network that it was before, and it never really kind of was in places that just general media would make visible. But now it is, because the whole kind of media landscape has changed, and from all the YouTubes that are around to the blogs to the social media, there's people sharing examples of, oh, this is what I'm doing here, this is what I'm doing in another part of the world. I'm in an urban area, or I'm in a rural area. You can find the information so much more readily now than you ever could before. And so, whereas there were, I remember hearing a long time ago people saying, well, where do I learn about this? I can only go to a course here or a course there, but where do I find out? Now you can just flip open your phone or your computer and you can find it absolutely anywhere. So I think it's
much more fun to go skateboarding and just like be totally off grid in your mind and just run into a flyer that just happens to be on your route.
Yeah, I totally get that, but I'm not saying that you do. It's an either or. I'm saying it's an and.
Yep.
You can be open to the possibilities more easily by seeing what's online. which then might help you to put on those lenses. So when you are skateboarding around, you might see and notice that stuff more, whereas it might not have jumped out at you, for example. Right. So or you might notice some wild food around where you'd not think about doing that before, or you might head down to the farmer's market where you have not thought about doing that before. So
I think could, photo some plants and ID them.
Yeah, there's such a different level of possibility. And the other thing that I think is really interesting from the work that I'm doing, for example, with refugee youth. So through the internet, these relationships have formed with communities throughout East Africa, from Kenya to Uganda, Tanzania, where there's all these young people in camps who are now starting to talk with each other. We've been supporting them to create, Perma Youth networks, and they're creating community food resilience programs and are really hooked into it, and they're using digital technology to share with one another about what they're doing and how to do. So I think it's super helpful, and also it gives them a chance too to hook in back into asking someone in the global community, like, we're stuck with this, what do we do, how do we fix this, what, got any ideas? And whereas before they would have been just on their own, not much possibility of that. And so I think it's an and. I definitely think it's an and, but I really would love to make sure that, like you're saying, that we keep the analog version of what we're doing with permaculture simultaneously to our digital.
Yeah, and there's good digital stuff. For example, your podcast, which maybe you would want to mention briefly, because I know I've listened to several episodes and gained new insight and ways of thinking about AIs and all kinds of things from your podcast more recently.
Yeah, so I host something called Sense Making in a Changing World. So I also have our Permaculture Life blog and YouTube channel, which is talking a lot about permaculture strategies and ideas and visit gardens. And then in the podcast, I really love to talk with people about different ideas or cross over to different fields of knowledge, so that pushing the boundaries of what the permaculture conversation is. So I'm talking to philosophers and scientists and AI people and all different people from different fields, as well as farmers and politicians, to really explore how are we to live, and how can permaculture be part of this conversation that's rippling out across the world, and reimagining what is the future as we, start to, see climate change. So how are we to create a climate safe future? And I think what we need to be doing is really bursting any bubbles or boundaries that exist between fields of knowledge, and to be talking together, to imagine together what's possible.
Swing it!
Something I'm trying to do with this podcast as well. Talk to many different people that are inspiring and have good ways of seeing the world.
Yeah, great. It's wonderful. And this is a really great use of technology. To be able to host conversations and share conversations, I think. One of the reasons why I did start the podcast too, because I was having these conversations all the time, and I would mention to people, I was just chatting to so-and-so about this and that, and the next time I had a class, and they said, oh, you should record those conversations. We'd love to hear them too. And I thought, nice. Of course. So that's where the podcast kind of emerged from.
That's awesome. So I know some of my watching permaculture change and grow kind of concept with the internet was that there's a lot, I feel more recently I've been coming across more antagonistical or volatile, perhaps, responses to the word permaculture along the lines of colonialism and, some of that concept around it. What are some of your thoughts around that? More recently, I feel like there's a predominance of voice on the internet anyway about permaculture from urban farmers and urban permaculture designers. I find most people who are talking about permaculture often categorize like forest garden is permaculture. But I feel like I'm always explaining that it's this like paint palette of things, and it's not just one thing is permaculture. Like they're all their own individual things that makes up this network, this community that you as a human are helping steward.
Yeah, look, there's so many things in what you just said to pick up on. I might pick up on the last thread first because, yeah, permaculture is not a herb spiral and a mandala garden and a food forest. Permaculture is like I've been saying all the time. It's a lens. It's a way of seeing and thinking and creating connectedness between things. So you can be designing your home, the landscape, your workplace, your livelihood, your whatever it might be through a permaculture lens of creating regenerative, integrated systems that support the nourishment of one planet living while maintaining like a really great quality of life at the same time. So, permaculture is not just a garden type. How you see it manifest, because of the principles and the ethics, you will see it manifest as, say, a food forest, because it makes sense in terms of having the multiple layers and the connectivity. So but it is not the permaculture. It is the result of permaculture thinking and design. There's so many different ways to respond to what you were talking about before about, perma-colonialism. I think there's a lot about maybe experience or language, or right from the very start. If anyone ever pulls out the original permaculture designer's manual, right at the very start is deep acknowledgement of Indigenous cultures, traditional practices, and not trying to say that this is something new that is, that has started out and we've come up with this great idea. It is deeply embedded and acknowledging all of that wisdom from, millennia. And here is a way that we're trying to articulate it and bring it into our current state of play now to help people understand what are regenerative ways of moving forward. And so this is how I've always tried to explain it, and always deeply acknowledging the roots of this wisdom and calling in for us to open these conversations about it. So, often when I'm working here in Australia, and we're working with Indigenous cultures too, it's really just and also in Indonesia and places like that, in villages where we're hosting conversations to see how those principles and practices can be resurfaced. For example, I'm just going to jump to the Indonesian example. When I was working there was a lot of people saying, well, in the 1970s, the government and the military came through and forced us to abandon doing what is kind of like what you're talking about, and to take on these chemicals, these seeds. And if we didn't hand over our seeds, we were threatened at gunpoint and people were killed.
What the action form?
And so there's this like 30 years at that time when I was there, 30 years of oppression and dictate that you must do it this way. And so it's really about peeling off that layer and being able to allow that sort of the flourishing of the traditional practices, which were food forests and seed saving and all the things that are permaculture. And so in that case, what I find the value of permaculture is creating a space to have a conversation to allow the traditional practices and knowledge to resurface.
Well, yeah.
And, so there's so many different ways to do this. And permaculture, I think one of the key things that I really like about it is that it's not a set of recipes or a set of dictates. it is a way of thinking, and that way of thinking and that way of design, it's really systems thinking, ecological thinking in action. It lands differently anywhere. So if you're in a city, or you're in a suburb, or you're out on a ranch, or you're in a forest, or you're in where in Indonesia or India or Africa or Peru, there are different ways that it lands and makes sense within the cultural constructs, within the language, within the traditional practices, within the traditional medicines. And so, the key thing as a permaculture practitioner is really to be, if you're in those places, is to show examples of what is possible with a clear description of where it's from and what its context was, but then at the same time ask really great questions about what's possible locally, rather than going in and telling how to do it. And on the other point that you said about, there's all these people going around planting the wrong things in the wrong places, like, I think there's a lot of learning that needs to take place. And I think we need to also be a little bit gentle on people. Like, I really applaud people who are willing to give it a go, make mistakes, but learn from their mistakes. Go, I don't even think about that. Like when I was starting, I made dreadful mistakes, but I learned from it. And so that's kind of the key principle of one of the first principles of permaculture is, observe and interact. Really be, and also another one is about, adapting to change and being self-reflective. And so, none of us know exactly what we should do in any particular situations. We're all in a learning space, which is why I think it's so important that we cultivate learning communities, global learning communities, and local learning communities. So if you're in a local community, join up with a local group that's learning together, not trying to step up and be an expert there, but just be learning together. And, what I do with the Permaculture Education Institute, I've also acknowledged that it's not enough just to do a 2-week course and then, go out by yourself. Like, you only have the doors opening, but like to be able to have a place where you can come back and keep asking and share your designs and get feedback and ask questions. I think this is where the digital space has become really, really valuable, that we can create global learning communities that can support us to be in this learning continuously, become lifelong learners, and to have spaces to do that.
That's incredible. So, something I wanted to go back to was the traveling to other places and teaching and whatnot. And I do remember a very early on learning about Ladakh from you. You were telling us about going there, and one of the things that stands out and has ever since, I remember you mentioned you were going there to help encourage people in their life and what they were doing and how they've always done it. At the same time, there was factories coming that were offering this Western way of life. They could go work there for a day and make $1 and be able to buy a bag of potato chips and not be at their home site interacting with the ecosystem around them, generating the abundance that they always have had. So that's definitely something that I've carried with me in any way that I've been sharing permaculture along the way. I try to encourage that in everyone that's learned about permaculture from me as well.
Yeah, great. And I think that's such it's such an important part of the work. And I still stay in touch, regularly with Helen and Norberg Hodge, who I've volunteered with up there in the Ladakh project. And actually, June is World Localization Month, and we're about to launch into a whole series of conversations with Helena about relocalization and this whole process. But what needs to happen in those kind of contexts is, the most important thing is opening up the conversations, because in that context, say, of Ladakh, the media that they see on the telly is that if you were modern and advanced and heading in the direction of progress, then this is the kind of thing that you do, and that having money and these clothes and this kind of food is progress and you're looked up to. And so it's shifting the dial on that. And like, what do we really see as being desirable? What is the things that we really value? And how can we shift towards, more of a genuine progress indicator rather than the GDP? And so we're seeing this a lot.
Yeah.
We're seeing this coming through with the donut economics, with the, with Bhutan's genuine progress indicator, the gross national happiness. And we are seeing a shift in that. And I think exactly what you're doing, talking it up, always sharing that shift in perception, and not trying to go in and anyone say, you should not do this, you should do this. Like, if anyone starts to come in and say that, I think you need to take a breath in and a deep breath out and to create a greater context for those conversations to happen in, because we start to get into this either or binary thing when we're really frustrated or angry. It's like, no, not that, or yes, this, and that's totally, it's totally necessary in a way to be really identifying clearly what's right in this space or what's wrong, but that's only not necessarily for everybody or for everything. So I think we need to shift away from that right or wrong language when we're trying to be, particularly when we're trying to be leaders in our community or to be educators in our community, to be creating spaces for an exploration and as much as possible to demonstrate what's possible, so we can walk through and say, oh, look, this is what's happening here, and to say, oh, well, I've been noticing that that's not working so well over here, so I've tried this. And it's this curiosity, this playfulness continuously, rather than saying, I've got it all worked out and I know how to do it, so let me show you how. It's a shift away from that to be in that awe together.
Yeah, you gotta show up curious. You want to know. You want to show up with that face, like, I want to learn from you. You want to show up and just with eyes of amazement that you see things that are amazing. Share that it's amazing that it's being done in such a way, and the interaction, that I can't say it enough. It's that interaction with the ecosystem where we're part of it, moving through it. When you see that, encourage it, let it grow.
Practivist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't not do that though, because it is amazing. Life is amazing. Lifing is amazing. How it continues, and all the incredible diversity and flavors and colors and scents and shapes and life forms and relationships in between things. I mean, it's just incredible. Every day is an adventure if you put that lens on, and it's just wonderful.
Yeah, I mean,
I remembered I was going to tell you before a little bit of a story too about you went in our decolonization conversation. I wanted to mention one of the podcast conversations that I had, and you could probably listen to it, is with an Aboriginal elder, and from Ross Williams. You'll see him on there. You might want to link to it.
Okay.
And I was asking him about this thing about permaculture and Indigenous cultures, and he's basically just saying, yeah, it's the same. We've been permaculturalists forever. That is what we do. We might have done it slightly different than what you're explaining now, but it's one and the same. And I just think that we need to, I keep saying this over and over, it's about being in conversation together. It's not about going to an Indigenous community and saying, hey, I've got a really great way that I reckon you could do this. It's about going and asking the questions about, how to be more regenerative, or is there a way that we can help you? There's some ideas that you're looking for some support in doing some things. And so and also probably more than anything else, is to be in a state of constant listening and constant learning and constant possibilities of adapting and changing. It's this thing of being right. It's not like being right in one moment. You can be, but possibly that moment changes tomorrow or next season. So
new question comes up.
And
curious.
also to find ways to open up the possibilities of being in relationship and learning with Indigenous communities, with First Nations communities everywhere, because I'm just from my experience here in Australia that the conversation is around how we can walk forward together, not an either or, but how we can be in deep listening and to foreground First Nations wisdom, knowledge, experience, ideas, ways of governing. We've just got a new government here in Australia, and it's very exciting because one of the first things that they started to talk about is the Uluru Statement of the Heart, and so we have the possibility now in Australia to have a treaty and to actually move forward to centering Indigenous voices in our parliament. And I think we need to be doing exactly the same in everything that we do, permaculture included.
That's awesome. I really hope that it goes that way and shows a good example.
I hope so too. I've been really ashamed of Australia for too many years now.
Yeah. So I know one moment I had in my life where I felt Indigenous was when I visited Ireland. And I think it was because I went to a stone circle that apparently my family was connected to, that was built a long time ago, and just to sit in that stone circle was amazing. But I came back to the United States, to Indiana, where I got this little cute homestead and been living, and it's interesting. I definitely feel at place here. There's a lot of sentient beings to consult and learn from, different plants and animals and people, so many different kinds of people. It's amazing. The river tells stories.
The river tells stories.
Yeah, and I think that, the lesson that I learned too, because I also been asking elders about this thing about becoming Indigenous, and you can't become a First Nations person, but you can become deeply connected to place and to be someone who is responding and caring and regenerating the land and being part of the new story that is what this place is about, in conversation with local people who've been here forever. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because maybe in America, quite some like here, there is I think there's a level of disconnection because of the guilt of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think we just need to get over that and start to really behave well and to listen well and to connect, and like I said before, to foreground Indigenous knowledge, First Nations peoples.
I think another thing that I've found in conversation with Indigenous friends and friends of all sorts of ethnicities, we definitely have them all in America, and it's beautiful. And I find that in my conversations, often people appreciate when I just say, yeah, I'm a colonialist. I came from colonial people, and I've explored that. Like, a lot of times people like to argue or defend that they are not, but I mean, I obviously am, and I'm not Indigenous to the land that I live on. And it's an interesting thing to think about, but we definitely live in a new ecosystem than existed prior to colonialism, and how can we learn to live in this new forest? We used to have chestnut tree canopies here. I mean, amazing food. They're all gone.
Wow.
So it's this whole different forest growing here. We have Asiatic plants. There's I can't remember which one it is. I wish I could right now, but I remember identifying some Australian native plants growing here. There's, plants from all the different parts of the world growing here.
Yeah, but just, going back to what you said before, I think it's so much about how you show up. How you show up in that conversation, how you show up with all of your being, with all of your listening, with all of your heart, and to be present together in moving forward in a way that is different from how it's been over the last few hundred years. And I think what also matters is how you're tending to your own life and your community, and whether that is deeply connected and respecting, the place, culture, the community of life. Like, how are we putting life at the center of all things that we do? And what I'm noticing is that by living in that way, that it's demonstrating a more indigenous, you can't call it indigenous way, but it's a more indigenous way of being in life, that the friends that I've been talking to who are Indigenous Australians are saying, if more people live like that, gosh, wouldn't it be an incredibly different place, and we would have incredibly different conversations, and we want people to be respecting the land, to be deeply connecting with the community of life that is here in this country. And so, open up the spaces to encourage people to do that, to be in conversation with, like you said, with Indigenous communities, with people from all different places. Like, I don't know what the community is like where you are living, but here in southeast Queensland, it's an incredibly diverse place. Australia is very much like your country, that it's hard, it's like, where are you from? Well, you have to be from where you are, and you have to deeply care where you are, because we're from all over, and we just need to all come together and care together about our bioregion, and to really come deeply back into that sense of, this is where I'm from, this is where I'm based. Like you said at the start, I'm from Melbourne, so that's where I was born. Okay. And so I acknowledge that, I'm from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, not far from the Mullumbimby River, and I'm now living on Gubbi Gubbi land, and I'm deeply connected to this place with the Jinnaburra country to the east, and on the banks of the Mukabulla River, and getting to know the Indigenous names of place rather than just the colonial names of place. What are some of the Indigenous names of plants and their relationships, and what they signify in terms of what seasons are coming and the changes, and starting to understand place quite differently from what we've come with the colonial way of farming, or the colonial way of understanding what food is, and it shifts. When you start to shift your relationship to place and to food and to seasons and to language, it starts to shift so many other things about just how you are. Like, there's this reorientation, sort of like it settles differently in your body, and in how you interact in everything that you do.
Wake the farm up.
Wow. Well said. I really appreciate that. All right. Thank you, everybody. This has been so much fun.
Look, it's just been really lovely to chat with you, because that was probably the course that you came to here was probably the very first one that I did on this block, and I'm sitting about 10 meters from where you made a garden.
Wow.
And yeah, that's a really nice sort of full circle. And you know, I'm still teaching permaculture. I now teach permaculture teachers because I really feel like one of the best things that we can be doing in the world is to be myceliating this kind of way of thinking and knowledge. And so I just see the possibilities and the potential for as many people as possible to become really respectful and caring permaculture educators wherever they are in the world.
I would definitely recommend people that are wanting to teach and share permaculture learn from you, Morag.
Yeah, thank you. It's really lovely to chat to you, and I'm so thrilled that you found a flyer in Brisbane. I've pinned up on a wall. I feel like all that walking around the city pinning up notices was worthwhile after all.
Yeah.
Well, I'm probably going to head out and have a chat to my chickens for a bit and wander around the garden looking for some interesting things that I can prepare for lunch. And I'm not sure what I'm going to find today, but it's going to be delicious.
No, wait, you called your chickens.
Chooks. Chooks, yeah.
That's so fun.
I keep forgetting that. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that was a great time. All right, everybody, let's give a big round of applause for Morag Gamble, who came to be with us here from Crystal Waters, Australia, Permaculture Village.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Andy.
Sharing some deep thoughts, meaningful experiences. That's what this show is all about. Thank you so much for being here. Love you all. Keep listening to this podcast. Explore the other episodes. Have fun. Stay tuned. There'll be more coming from the mother farming elf.
Lily Pills.
Lily Pillies.